Good afternoon. From wherever you're joining us for this webinar, I want to say, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being a part of our webinar this afternoon. We say welcome to everyone to our conversations on wealth management, where we are going to be looking at the trends and the dynamics that are shaping the lives and legacies of affluent and high net worth individuals. It promises to be a very instructive and a very resourceful session. And we have an esteemed panel of panelists that will do justice to the subject. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. And we do hope that at the end of the entire session, we would have started a conversation, and we can always take that conversation further. So without much ado, just to talk about us a bit, Fiduciary Services Limited is the one hosting this webinar. I manage Fiduciary Services Limited. My name is Mercy Edukugo Amina. We provide private client services. So we are all about families. We are all about the preservation of the family. We are all about the preservation of the wealth, of the assets of the family. And we are all about the legacies that the family has within the society, within the family space, and the entire society at large. So that's what we do. We're all about putting our clients, the interest of our clients, and the concerns that they have, and being able to work with them as a family to ensure that they have enduring legacies, and their footprint within the society is also an enduring one. Talk about a bit of our house rules today. So we have question and answer box. So please, if you do have questions, if you do have questions that you want to share, you want to ask any of the panelists as we speak, please drop them at the question and answer box. If you want to say some other things, you want to chat, but it's not a question, just want to talk and all that, we also have the chat box that is available as well. You can be certain that all your questions will be accommodated, whether they will be accommodated as we speak or whether they will be accommodated offline, but you can be assured that your questions will definitely be answered. And please, let's engage. Please, let's engage. I mean, it's a new year, and we're trying to set the tone, and we're trying to set out what are the things that are critical, that are of concern to us, to our families, to those that we love, and to our assets. So please, let's engage, let's ask questions, and let's engage as we go on with the webinar. We are starting already, and just to have a bit of introductory comments. We are in the third year of COVID. I was just talking to someone and I was saying, everyone, I seem to kind of just have deleted 2020, but it's actually the third year of COVID, if we consider that COVID was in 2020, that it hit us between February and March, and we went into full total lockdown from March, global lockdown from March. But we are in the COVID aftermath. And right now, what COVID has done for us within the wealth management space, within the affluent space, it has brought a realization of mortality. So for all the wealthy ones, for all the affluent ones, there is the realization of our mortality. And when we are speaking about mortality, it's no longer in an abstract way. COVID has really, apart from the technological disruptions that we've had, and the way we've also have to embrace technology within the COVID phenomenon, is also the fact that we've also had to embrace the mortality of those that we love and our mortality as well. And as we do that, it brings to fore who are we, what do we stand for, what's our values, what are we leaving behind, what footprints are we leaving behind. So those are the conversations that you would have affluent and wealthy people talk about. So it's about embracing our mortality, and now using that as a force for good in our direct family as well as the society at large. Just about when we were coming out of COVID, we had the Russian invasion or the Russia-Ukraine war, and that kind of upended a whole lot of things, and that is still ongoing. What that has done for this space is also we had a raft of sanctions. We had individuals that were sanctioned. The individuals belonged to a lot of Russian oligarchs, and their families were sanctioned, and that also brought to fore issues around mobility. We are going to have Troy from Hanley talk to us around the sanctions, around how that has affected HNIs and affluents when they are discussing mobility, and where they place their assets and what happens to their assets within the global space. We also have China. Speaking about China, decided to continue with this zero COVID, but right now it's actually opened its doors, and we expect a lot of more productive activity to come. 2022 was also very significant because we crossed the 8 billion population in that same year. That was the year when Elon Musk as well took over Twitter. And I don't think our lives have been the same ever since he came on board. We also have Bernard Arnault that has overtaken him as the richest man in the world. That is a family business. That's the LVMH group that have a brand of different luxury brands under their management. What we do know is that within the next decade, we are going to have the Great Wealth Transfer, where we are expected to have about $35 trillion being transferred from one generation to the next generation. So all the patriarchs and matriarchs, they would have to do something about their assets, and they're going to transfer it. So what are the considerations? What are the things that we bring to fore? What are the conversations that such families, such individuals will be having? 2022 also saw the raft of crypto billionaires. We had a lot of billionaires that came into the space as a result of the crypto assets. And we know how that whole space of cryptocurrency and investments are already shaping out with all the things that have happened, with the exchange that has collapsed, and other players trying to ensure that they don't go the way of that. ChatGPT is here. So like you said, we embraced technology within the COVID years, immediately the onset of COVID and thereafter. Now we are now having ChatGPT that is going to revolutionize the way we actually view artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence has left the space of a robot working, or we are watching it in movies, is actually come and is going to become mainstream. So we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about digital assets and what we should do as regards digital assets. Right now, we have a lot of families that are scattered around the world doing different things, and whether it's philanthropy, whether it's pursuing agendas that ensure that we have a world that is sustainable, a world that we can give to further generations and all that. So we'll be talking in depth about all this. What are the concerns that families should have? What are the concerns that where the individuals should have? I mean, wealthy or affluent individuals should have. And what are the things that are going to shape up 2023? For us in Nigeria, yeah, we have an election, and that is coming up in about 30 or less days. So that's also something that we are also positive about. There's going to definitely be a government change. So how does that translate into wealth creation for Nigerians, both those that are in Nigeria and those that are abroad or in the diaspora? So without much ado, this promises to be a very fantastic conversation, and I'm not alone. I have my panel of experts, so to speak, that are going to dissect the entire conversation spread that we would have. And the conversation spread is just about in different breadths. we will be looking at Islamic estate planning, we will be looking at digital assets, we'll be looking at family offices investments, we'll be looking at family wealth advisory, we'll be looking at private equity, venture capital, and how that whole plays into the space of family wealth or wealth management and the trends and dynamics that affect affluent people. So we are just going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So please, let's take it. Okay, so we have Sisi Mutendi. Sisi is a founder and lead consultant at Zaka Legacy Energy. She's a co-founder at African Family Firm, a non-profit African Family Business Association. Sisi is a world-vast award-winning businesswoman with over 14 years experience of building her own successful publishing and educational businesses during this time. Sisi developed a passion for assisting family businesses to build multi-generational legacy. She's recognized globally for her business acumen and world-class delivery. Through various board appointments in numerous industries, Sisi has had exposure to many global business development strategies, especially in Africa. She's a global resource who has been featured on many platforms, including Athena 40, Forbes Africa, Billionaire Africa, Aries Africa, and many more. She has given keynote speeches at leading industry events, such as the STEP Global Congress in London, that was held in London last year. Mark Lerner. Mark is the co-founder of Dream VC, an investor accelerator and community-driven educational platform for Africa, providing rigorous programs that help entrepreneurs and professionals across the African continent and among interested foreigners to break into the Africa venture capital industry. Outside Dream VC, Mark is an advisor for 8+ early-stage startups and an award-winning African startup mentor, having helped startups raise upward of $10 million in venture capital funding over the last few years. Rashid Olaoluwa is a wealth manager and professional expert with experience spanning portfolio management, project structured finance, mergers and acquisition, alternative investments, fixed income and investment strategy. He has strong experience in originating, structuring, and executing deals in sectors such as banking, insurance, oil and gas, real estate, telecoms, and manufacturing. He started his career at United Capital and is also an investor accelerator fellow at Dream VC. Rashid is currently the principal CEO of Ranora Consulting, an advisory firm which aims to provide clients with the expertise, resources, and access required to structure finance and execute value-creating investments and business growth initiatives. Trohani is a director of private clients with over 10 years of experience advising ultra high net worth families to secure an alternative residence or citizenship through cross-border investment. He specializes in assisting clients to migrate, strengthen their global mobility, and also obtaining specific offshore investments. Troy started out as a business law tutor at the International Academy of New Zealand and moved into Marcom Pacific as a licensed immigration advisor and national business development manager. Troy works alongside bankers, wealth managers, lawyers, family offices, and many other professionals who serve globally mobile private clients. The director of private clients at Henley & Partners, the firm of global citizens. We have Aisha Zubai. Aisha is an astute researcher and skilled professional with a special interest in teaching and facilitating the application of Islamic banking and finance, Sharia audits, Marat, and WAC management, as well as general law principle, fiqh, muamalat, and usul fiqh. Aisha has garnered a combined 10 years of experience as a researcher and industry expert. She has worked as a Sharia auditor with Jaiz Bank, an Islamic bank that is located in Nigeria. She's currently a lecturer with the Department of Islamic Law, Faculty of Law, Kwara State University. And some of our research activities are available in reputable journals, ResearchGate, Academic Edu, and Google Scholar, to mention a few. Aisha is an IOFI certified Sharia advisor and auditor. She also holds a professional certificate in Islamic estate distribution from the Akima University and professional certificate in banking and finance from BUK University, Kano. Mr. Shofola Osho is an astute legal practitioner with years of experience in governance, risk, and compliance support for major corporates. He holds a bachelor's of law and was called into the Nigerian bar in 1999. Started his career as a legal advisor at Stallion Property and Development Company. Thereafter, at various times in his career, he has provided legal compliance and secretarial services at Intercontinental Properties, Siemens Nigeria, Access Bank PLC, and First Bank of Nigeria. He's currently the company secretary, legal advisor of the Development Bank of Nigeria, DIB. He's a chartered secretary by the Institute of Secretaries of Nigeria. He's also a certified anti-money laundering specialist and a member of the Society for Corporate Governance in Nigeria. Welcome to you, sir. Lee Poskandia. Lee is the CEO of Directive Communication Systems, a technology company delivering digital asset property succession management solution for stakeholders involved with an individual's death. Lee has successfully led product innovation at some of the most recognized companies, including American Express, Safeway, Polygram Video, and Staples, creating industry standards and practices for the legal tech, fintech, entertainment, and consumer services categories. With the launch of Directive Communication System, Lee quickly recognized the opportunity to help address the growing challenges and complexities that face legal practitioners in handling digital property and the succession management attendant thereto. He has become a respected authority on the digital afterlife and has instructed courses for the American Bar Association, STEP International, and several state and local bar associations, as well as other industry associations. Lee has also been an observer on several committees relating to digital properties and trust and also estates work. Lee has been featured in leading press, including TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, CNBC.com, NPRO, and Trust and Estates magazine. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us, Lee. Okay, so that is it. So we are going to go straight up into our first panel conversation for the day. We are going to have two panels. So we have the first panel and the second panel. For the first panel, we would, for the second panel, before we start the second panel, we would have a water break of about 2 or 3 minutes. And after we've taken all the questions and provided as much of the conversation leads in this first panel. So to get us started, I'm going to ask everyone. So Tissy, Mark, Rashid, and Troy, you're going to have a minute each to tell us in 2023, what are the trends and dynamics that are shaping the lives and legacies of affluent and high net worth individuals. So I'll start with Sissy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I think 2023 is going to be a different year globally, especially for high net worth individuals. Coming out from COVID, we all had the shock of having to face a global pandemic and having our businesses and our families affected. So in 2023, as the world starts picking up and starts looking forward into a future that is tech advanced and is pushing a future that is very tech focused, everything has gone online, everything has become digital. For high net worth individuals, that means we have more modern families, more globalized families. People are relocating all over the world. They are going for multiple citizenships, as well as looking for jurisdictions that are going to be favorable, not only for their money, but also for their businesses and the future of their next gens. I think it's a very exciting time, especially when we look also at the trends, looking at Africa becoming a hub and Africa looking at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, as well as the One Africa passport that is being spearheaded by the AU. Hopefully those trends will also impact what the global ultra-high net individuals see in Africa, and it might see more funds being flooded into the continent. And the change of governance, especially through the politics that we see, there's a lot of changes of government that's probably going to happen this year, because we have a lot of elections scattered across the continent, more so in your country, in Nigeria, as well as in Zimbabwe. We see also what is going on in South Africa, the electricity problem, as well as the other rising political issues. So all those things are going to impact the pockets of high net worth individuals and the decisions that they make going into the future. And we look forward to seeing what 2023 was really going to bring to the forefront, especially as the world has opened up.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So it's just talking about the issue of mobility and funds inflow and jurisdiction. Troy, what would you say are the trends and the dynamics that would shape the lives of the HNIs and your families this 2023?
Yes, thank you, Mercy. So I think 2023, above all else, it would probably be volatility. I feel like more than ever, there's been so many issues in various different regions around the world that is going to really threaten or potentially threaten families' safety, their financial wealth, maintaining their wealth, growing their wealth. And a few examples, you can look at South America, where there's been massive political instability in places like Brazil. You can look at Africa, potentially where there is an election this year, I believe it is in Nigeria. There is always some concerns about volatility in that regard. But for the first time ever, it's not just about emerging markets. Now, large Western economies have very concerning trends. You look at the US, the political instability there, the UK, the mess that Brexit has caused, and the war in Eastern Europe that's currently going on. So no region is safe. There's volatility everywhere. And our high net worth, ultra high net worth clients are speaking to us daily about ways to mitigate the risk to themselves and their families.
Very, very, very interesting. Yeah, we do live in a volatile world. Rashid, let's hear.
Thank you, Mercy. I think a key trend for this year to look out for will be recession. So when the chairman of IMF spoke, Christine, she mentioned about 2/3 of the world will be entering a recession this year, and given everyone is expecting a soft landing from the US Fed, it's highly unlikely because China is open now. China accounts for about 60% of global demand, especially for commodities. So we're expected to see the likes of oil, copper, silver starts to pretty much tick up, given that they're a manufacturing hub. They pretty much had to let go of their zero COVID policy because it wasn't working. It was setting them back. In terms of what HNIs need to look out for, they just need to focus more on alternative investments. Last year, traditional investments took a very strong beating. No sector was spared. The equity market was down. The Eurobond space was particularly down. We know Ghana defaulted. They put their interest payments on their Eurobonds on hold. So I think this year they'll be looking towards other sectors that provide value, such as venture capital, hedge funds. Even the theme now, because if you think about it, given this was pretty much the most aggressive rate hike the US has ever done, right? Just to combat inflation, because inflation is big right now. Nigeria are above 21%. Ghana is at 54%. The US is still at 6.5%. And they have a target to get to 2%, right? But unfortunately, people overlook the fact that inflation is not really easing. If you look at the trend of prices recently, so gas had dropped, right? But oil has started ticking up again. China is open now, is expected to continue trending upwards, right? So commodity prices, you're talking about your wheat, the food people eat. They said 60-70% came out of Ukraine that was supposed to come to Africa. but only 30% made its way. So you have this whole tension between Russia, US, US, China also escalating again, but trying to moderate because they typically have trade wars, which also then affect the rest of the world. So it's how do you hedge, your portfolio against these things? So I think those are the key trends we would be looking at this year. So which is why we keep telling people you need to diversify, think long term. Don't expect things to come, like for example, we are not currently advising entering the markets, especially, equities or, crypto, like they say, because these things are rallying on very low liquidity. We're looking at a lot of short squeezes that are going on right now. So a lot of people are buying just to cover their existing positions and they're still getting liquidated. So it's just, be on the safe side. I don't want to take too much time, but another thing I wanted to speak to in terms of trends and dynamics is, so if you look at Africa as a case study, right, it's very hard to see something like the Rockefeller, right, where wealth is transferred generation to generation. I don't think I can mention up to 3 people off the top of my head that wealth transferred from 3 different generations. It typically dies at the first one. And this is as a result of, 4 asset structures that they have. So I think in terms of like your family governance and financial planning, it's something HNIs need to wake up to and start thinking about how they want to pretty much set up like their family councils, trusts, and other legal entities that can help them better secure their wealth for the future.
Okay, thank you so much for that. You've almost taken us into the conversation, but we still have to hear Troy speak. So Troy, sorry, not Troy, Mark. We still have to hear Mark speak. So Mark, we do know that if we go the route of traditional asset classes, I'm not so certain that families are going to be smiling to their banks and looking favorably into their accounts. So what would you say within the space of the PE, the private equity and the venture capital space?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mercy, you know quite well that I'm someone who's very bullish on the future of VC and private equity. The market always goes through cyclical periods where we have a couple of years of growth and a couple of years of pullback, but that's largely driven by large institutional players. But family offices, in contrast, they sit in a very interesting position where they have the opportunity to get the best of both worlds, to thrive both when global economic markets are turning down and VC markets struggle to raise capital, and to do well when VC markets are booming. I think from my point of view, 2023 is really going to be shaped by movement of capital and movement of individuals. This really affects the private equity space as well, because for any fund, whether a VC fund, growth fund, or private equity fund, the relationship that they have with their backers, with limited partners, is shaped by what's currently going on in the market. Right now, for example, in January, you don't want to be an emerging manager raising your fund for the first time, because you're in a scenario where you're competing with a record number of new managers, emerging managers, first-time managers, and at the same time, the global economic outlook, as so well mentioned by Rashid, Tsitsi, and Troy earlier, is not necessarily looking very optimistic. At the same time, I think specifically for a family office that has the relative luxury of being able to control its own microeconomic environment, the private equity market, especially the long-term illiquid nature of private equity markets, actually acts as an amazing hedge against market volatility today. What you see happening in public markets, where an ETF portfolio can be destroyed overnight, or where a public equity portfolio is essentially entirely exposed to geopolitical risks, that takes time to trickle down to private markets. And the core fundamental advantage that private companies have is that almost lack of transparency, which means that they have a shield protecting them from public opinion. The price of a company is valued less on what the public thinks, on what Elon Musk posts on Twitter, or on what the current trend is in social media conversations, and much more on the fundamentals of that company and the potential they have ahead of them. With that in mind, if family offices increase their exposure to private equity and VC now, once the economic recession that we are most likely to see in the next year is finally over, whether that's in 2024, 2025, or even 2026, they will be at an advantage to any other institutional wealth manager that maybe has currently been decreasing or not increasing their exposure to this high risk, high reward asset class. So yes, I think I stand by my typical position. I would strongly advise most family offices to diversify into the alternatives with a view that long term, this will help them ride out the current crisis and come out with a strong advantage in generating new family wealth.
Thank you so much for that. So, Sisi, let's talk about families and family wealth planning, family generational wealth, and all that. I mean, when we are talking about the definition of wealth, how would you define wealth as an advisor?
I think from governance advisor perspective, I look at wealth from the 5 capitals of wealth. That was a parameter or framework that was set up by Jay Hughes. I look at families from their human capital, as well as their intellectual capital, their social capital, their spiritual capital, before we look at the financial capital. Because we all know that as families, as much as we can amass financial wealth, it's really important for us to be aligned and understand the resources we have within the family, through the human resources we have, the intellectual experience that the family has holistically in business and on a personal level, as well as looking at the social capital. What is our philanthropy doing for us? What is the name of the family that is out there and the reputation of the family? I think we've seen that our social capital is very important, especially with the takeover of Twitter and the various influences that just one person has had in terms of social capital. That impacts the whole family when it comes to decision making. It also impacts us according to our wealth. We've seen that companies can lose wealth and families can lose wealth really quickly just from a simple message that goes on social media. So looking at all the 5 capitals of wealth is really important than just looking at what the financial can do for us. Aligning as a family, understanding what our goal is, having a shared vision, understanding our history, as well as having shared values that then take us into the next level. Because ultimately, whether we like it or not, death and taxes are the biggest thing that impact everybody globally. And when we look at families, we're looking at next gens. Next gens are the people that are going to take over the wealth. They're the people that are going to be given the responsibility of taking the family name, the family business long into the future. As we see now, H&M has become one of the biggest businesses and has the richest man in the world sitting at the top of the pile, and it's a family-owned business. It's because they're able to harness all the 5 capitals of wealth and be able to implement it in a way that then enhances their financial wealth. So for me, when looking at wealth and families, is definitely working around the 5 capitals, working with families to understand how all those capitals work together, so that ultimately when they make decisions that impact their financial wealth, they can really harness and really put the right resources where they're necessary and make the decisions that will help them and their next gen have multi-generational wealth.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So that really takes us into the conversation of asset protection. So Rashid, I mean, when people talk about asset protection across jurisdictions, and even whether it's locally as well, I mean, what would you say in the context of wealth management or planning your wealth?
All right, thank you, Mercy. So for asset protection, I'll first start with the importance, right? So I would give a scenario I think most people might be able to relate with, because it tends to happen a lot, especially in Nigeria. Someone passes away and you see a lot of struggling and fighting over, the family wealth. There's no proper will in place. Documentation is not properly done. So asset protection basically encompasses your ability to safeguard your assets, against lawsuits, against this fights, against fraud as well, and against potential creditors. It's just a way of separating yourself from the ownership of the assets, so that regardless of what happens to you, your business operations still run smoothly, which also speaks to what Sisi mentioned, right? If you're able to plan with these 5 pillars, like irrespective of whatever happens to you, your wealth should still continue to grow. Your wealth should still be able to cater for the next generation. In fact, because of the culture you build from the structure you've created to protect your assets, it's easily transferable to the next gen, right? So, for example, there's different types of asset protection structures. You have limited liability companies or exempted companies. For a family, you could have a family limited partnership, right? So this just pretty much transfers ownership from yourself into that company. And then you can have different, you can have like an advisory board, an MD, a committee, and even have your children sit on the different institutions. That way, everyone knows what their roles are, right? When it comes to estate planning, it's an important aspect of asset protection for affluent individuals and families. So this has to do with like setting up your will, your trust, or any other legal documents, just to ensure that all your assets are distributed according to the individual's family wish upon their death. Then there's international asset protection as well.
I think we've lost audio from Rashid. But just to talk about what the conversation has been so far, a lot of us have mentioned. Okay, so Rashid, we lost you there. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, sorry,
okay.
where did you stop at?
No, you were talking about estate planning and having the proper documentation as well.
Okay, great. So the next is just international asset protection, which most often than none has to do with your tax planning. So a lot of people have like the ones that have LLCs already, they have like different assets in different countries that they just want to put under one umbrella, just to streamline so they are not paying multiple taxes or being double taxed. Overall, like asset protection is just like a holistic and dynamic process that involves identifying all your potential risk to you as an individual and your family, implementing the appropriate strategies to safeguard from this risk, putting the structures in place, and then just regularly monitoring and updating these measures, because laws and regulations are constantly changing. Some jurisdictions could be blacklisted or later whitelisted. So you need to understand why these things are happening, so you're not caught on the wrong end of the law. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Troy, let's talk about jurisdictions now, because I mean, the Russia-Ukraine war came upon us. And when you're talking about family wealth, when you're talking about the different capitals of wealth and all that, you find out that in very large families, they are scattered around the globe. They are probably not in one jurisdiction. They're probably doing different things in different continents across the world. How has it been as an advisor working with families that wealthy families that have been impacted by the sanctions as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war?
I guess the war with Russia and Ukraine has really unsettled quite a few people. The most obvious group of people that it's had an adverse effect on, besides people in Ukraine themselves, are Russians, Belarusians, who are, of course, not complicit in any of the activities there. So these people are really facing discrimination in a number of ways. For example, we know that just by virtue of being a passport holder of Russia and Belarus has led to people having their bank accounts closed in some countries. They have their visas cancelled, or they're not considered for visas at all for global mobility. And most immediately for us, the residence and citizenship programs, at least half of them have actually suspended all applications from Russians and Belarusians. So, I mean, that's a really tough pill to swallow. You can see it by the amount of people who are that were leaving Russia over the land borders, going to places like Georgia, and they're essentially refugees. So, from our perspective, this is another lesson in diversifying not just the wealth, as the other panelists have mentioned, but diversifying your residence and citizenship, because I think the lesson is that no one is kind of safe from their governments being complicit in actions like this, and their lives can be adversely affected because of that.
I mean, I'm just a bit curious. How many passports are you going to have as a wealthy family? I mean, because you're just like, how many passports can you have? so that you can ensure the mobility of your family, because you have family members that are either in school or have to be in a particular location because of health challenges, and they're getting the treatment in a different location and all that. How many passports are you going to have? How many programs are you going to have? And all that. I'm just thinking aloud with respect to Russian families and high net worth individuals that have been forced to really adding that all the structures they put in place have been unraveled. I'm going to ask Sisi now. So what is the singular thing that you think that this has done for families? I mean, the fact that you could just be in your house and think that everything is going on well with you, but you just have a government that is that has carried out one decision or the other, and all of a sudden everything has become fair game within different jurisdictions that you would operate in. We saw what happened to Chelsea for the football lovers here. We saw what happened to the owner. I know that he had to sell the club. We also followed all the news that happened with all the assets that they had, and how those assets were also frozen in different jurisdictions. So globalization has made us a very mobile society. So how do you manage that?
I think globalization in itself is a very good thing. It allows us to have access to different jurisdictions. It allows us to be global citizens and move to regions that are favorable to ourselves. Having multiple citizenship has obviously over the past few years has proven to be one of the greatest tools that high net worth individuals can have. When it comes to volatility, however, it's something that we cannot control. I think it comes more of a shock to more Western jurisdictions than it does to African jurisdictions. If you live on the continent, you know how volatile one day can be from the next day, especially with governments that can change their minds or who can put restrictions overnight, and you're waking up in a completely different world. It moves slightly differently in the West, but in Africa, you find a lot of high net worth individuals then choosing to put their assets on offshore destinations. But with globalization, we're quickly learning that even in foreign destinations, the noose is getting tighter for all people, especially ultra high net worths, and being vigilant about where we put our assets and diversifying our baskets, diversifying our citizenships, and allowing ourselves to have that room to maneuver is an advantage that high net worth individuals have over the rest of the population. And being able to seek help and advice from those individuals that can help them navigate these waters is probably the best advice that they can take in 2023.
Absolutely, I agree with you. So there is no doing it alone or a DIY mindset. You have to work with the advisors that can actually handhold you and put as much options that suits the purpose, that suits the concerns that you're trying to address. Mark, we know that we do a lot of somersaults when it comes to policies within the African continent, just like Sisi had alluded to. So within the VC space, I mean, you would because these are private markets, and you have enormous funds that go into this project or these ventures. Then you now have a policy redirection or a change in governance and all that. How do you mitigate against that? Especially when you're looking at investment that have been made by families or wealthy individuals, or if not, it could even be investment made by other funds that have been raised and all that, but you just have this change in direction and the whole thing just comes unraveling. So how do you manage that?
Of course, I mean, I think to a large extent, it's planning rather than adapting to an event, Messi. I think what really comes down to a good family advisor or good fund manager as well is the ability to think ahead, and to predict what might happen, right? I think just speaking back to the earlier point, for example, I think for most individuals who were associated with managing Russian wealth, it didn't come as an entire shock. It was not like Russia decided, woke up, next day there was war and nobody was talking about it. Anybody who took preventative measures, who was aware of the geopolitical situation, or who followed the news in Ukraine since about 2012, had the 10-year window to take adequate preparations, both to protect their capital, to protect their clients' capital, and to diversify as far as necessary. I'd say the same really goes to VC funds and private equity funds. Private equity funds and VC funds have an advantage and a disadvantage in that the money that they invest is incredibly illiquid. It's money that is no longer directly controlled by them. It cannot be pulled out of that investment, and that both means there's a good and bad thing to this. The good thing is that even if regulations change, if the regulations governing fund structure change, the regulations related to the way that trusts have to or don't have to disclose particular investments change, almost always these apply only proactively going forward rather than to retroactive investments, which mean that private equity and VC funds are largely protected based on their past behavior. At the same time, the structure of private equity and venture capital funds often protect their backers as well. So thinking about the family office world in connection to VC and PE, the whole aspect of limited partnership agreements exists on the basis of protecting the interests of that limited partner, of that HNI, of that family office that backs the VC, where they only are responsible for a limited degree of involvement to that VC. That protects them from any change in regulation that might somehow damage LPs in the future. It protects them from any risks or illicit behavior that the fund might take, which in itself is relatively unlikely, and it sometimes even can provide downside protection. The final point I'll say on this is actually globally, speaking more widely, if we look at the US, the European, the African, Southeast Asian, and the East Asian private equity and VC landscape, it's looking pretty good. It's never been as free of an environment to operate as it is now. There are a lot more sectors that are still largely unregulated, but regulation can sometimes be a positive influence. And there are a lot of countries now that are looking into providing support for reducing capital gains and creating more investment incentives to back private equity or VC investments, especially on the African continent, where we've seen about 8 or 9 countries pass more startup-friendly and investor-friendly policies just in the last 3 years alone. So, I think regulation and adaptation to all of these things is just about thinking proactively of the risks you're taking and preparing yourselves for the opportunities that might come up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Troy. Mark. Okay, so Troy, I need you to educate us a bit more. We need to know, I know Henley and Partners are the global, as in they are the global firm when it comes to global citizenship. And you also have your Henley and Partners passport index report, as well as index ranking. And I do have a bone to chew with you because where I see, I'm seated and speaking from Nigeria here. And when I looked at your ranking, I don't think I'm one happy Nigerian at the moment. So you need to let us know. Yeah, I know families need to have, families ordinarily, wealthy families, affluent families are ordinarily mobile. And you could have 2, 3 dual citizenship and all that. But as a Nigerian, I need to understand why are we in the position that we are in. So please, Troy, you need to shed more light on that for us.
Of course, and my apologies, Mercy. It wasn't me who put Nigeria there. Please don't blame me. Yes, so Henley's Passport Index is something that our chairman actually created some time ago, and it's essentially a ranking of every single passport in the world. And the way that we do this is based on a country's visa-free ability. So essentially, it's ranked on the number of countries that your passport can get you into visa-free, or in other words, visa on arrival. Just jump off the plane and they'll let you in, essentially. So this has become quite an important tool, and the reason is because it indicates your global mobility, the level of freedom you have to move around the globe, and this is becoming increasingly important for business people, for children to access education globally, and just families traveling leisurely. So it's been used quite a lot. When it comes to Nigeria, yes, the ranking is 96 out of 108 countries, so it's not great at the moment. I guess to make things worse is that unfortunately it's kind of been sliding lower on the list in recent years as well, which is a bit of a concern if you are a Nigerian passport holder. And for the reasons for that, I mean, if you think about how countries get visa-free ability, it's through agreements between countries. So, for example, let's say hypothetically the USA and Nigeria both agree to let each other's citizens travel visa-free between the countries. And so if these visa-free agreements are being stopped and ended by countries, Nigeria will, of course, fall down the list. The reason they would stop these agreements is due to perceived kind of social, economic, and political issues. So if, for example, the United States, they perceive that Nigeria has these growing issues, it may lead to Nigerian citizens traveling to the US and overstaying and, disappearing into the US without being seen again. So that's really what it's trying to stop. So unfortunately, Nigeria's slide down the list indicates that there's been growing kind of political, social, and economic problems there.
Yeah, that list really speaks volumes, and that's really why, as Nigerians, we need to get it right. I mean, the earlier we do, the better for us. So, what destinations now are Nigerians or Africans taking up citizenship right now? So, what would you advise, or what would you say are the destinations? And are there other things that someone should consider if you're thinking about a citizenship or a residency planning?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I think it's useful to think about this in two groups of people. When I think about our work with Nigerian families, there's a group that will actually migrate. They'll leave Nigeria. They're looking for a different lifestyle. Maybe they want to put their kids in education elsewhere. So in this category at the start, I would say the top three would be the US, Canada, and the UK. These three large Western economies, they seem to be of interest to people who want to move countries. And for the residence programs we work with there, these require that the families actually move there. So these applications can't be done whilst you're based in Nigeria. You have to kind of move, become a tax resident in another country, move your business, your employment, whatever it may be. The second group, and I think this is far more significant because it's a larger group that we deal with, is Nigerians that stay in Nigeria. They stay doing their business, their kids potentially stay going to school there, but they're making strategic investments out of Nigeria usually for a second passport or a second residence. And this kind of thinking is, it's not that they want to leave Nigeria because it's an exciting place. That's where the growth is. That's where they want to make their money. It's a plan B just in case something happens, if there's some volatility, some civil conflict, and also to travel, to have a second passport, to be able to get to the UK, to get to Europe. So in this category, we're mainly working with second passports for Nigerian families. One of the most common is a Caribbean passport. It's very quick to get, it's very affordable, but it's a very strong passport for travel and a great plan B, second option. Secondly, there's some opportunities in Europe. These are more a higher investment level, but there's things like Portugal, Spain, Malta, Austria. These kind of programs are available at a higher price point and very, very strong passports to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank God you mentioned Malta there. I know that the EU has kicked back on the citizenship. I mean, with the fallout from the Russian-Ukraine conflict, the EU has kicked back. Just a couple of days ago, we saw that even you have the countries themselves revoking the citizenship that has already been given. We saw Cyprus do that. The government of Cyprus do that. So how do you? I mean, yeah, I am today. I'm a high net worth individual. I'm an affluent. My passport doesn't rank so well, and I need to be mobile. I need to be able to enter a country without having to do all the paperwork. I have clients that fall within that space, and really having to do the paperwork every time can really be a very disincentive for you to get to be very mobile, especially with different things that you have to attend to. So how do you ensure that this passport that you're getting is not going to be revoked, and the EU is not going to come down the line and say, okay, for a Malta passport, this is how it's going to be, and all those that got those and all those that got the citizenship or residency passports, I mean, and all that, it just becomes back to square one. So how do you protect against that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so it's true that the European Union is not exactly happy about some of these programs that exist, and they're putting pressure on some of these countries that have the programs. However, these programs have remained in play. Program like Malta has been around for a long time, and the way it has survived is, defending their sovereign right, essentially, to define their own immigration rules. That's not something that the EU can dictate, and so countries like Malta have maintained the decision-making about who they let in as residents and citizens. So further to that, if it did eventuate that the EU closed these programs like Malta, for example, everyone who's gone through the process is safe. They're not going to get their passports revoked. They've made their investment, they've been granted the passport, they followed the rules, so they're safe at that stage. The case of Cyprus was a little bit unfortunate. The reason why that program ended is because of the way that it was run. There were certain private sector and public sector individuals who were not doing things in the correct way and following the right standards that should have been followed. So in that case, the government actually found cases of impropriety and then retrospectively revoked passports. So that's what happened in Cyprus. The programs we work with at Henley and Partners, such as Malta, have very high levels of due diligence. And so as long as you go through the process, you make full disclosures and there's no impropriety, you're very safe with your passport, even if the program closes subsequently.
Okay, noted. Sisi, let's talk about modern families. So let's talk about modern families within the context of Africa. So, I mean, how do we define? I know we are very traditionalist, we are very conservative within the African space, but what are you seeing when it comes to modern families? I mean, what does a modern family look like within the African context?
I think within the African context, modern families depends on which jurisdiction you are in, but a generic look at modern families within the African context is, with the global mobility that more people have now, and a lot of Africans having sent their children outside the country to get education in different global jurisdictions, we have seen intermarriages across the racial divide as well as across the cultural divide and the wealth divide. So because of that, there's a lot more due diligence that needs to be done, especially when you're working with families, to understand the different cultures that are coming together, the new governance structures that might be necessary to accommodate these cultures, especially with the creation of a next gen that comes from a diversified family, and understanding that as these families come together, there is going to be a continuation of the morphing and the dynamic of family and the definition of what family is. You find that also our definition of family has changed across the globe, where you have families that are now embracing things like adoption, as well as same-sex marriages. And in Africa, in some countries, there is the acceptance of that. And so when there is modern families, you have families coming together that have different belief systems, that have different heritage, and being able to recognize this and being able to work through the intricacies of relationship, respecting individuals, their boundaries, and also respecting what they would like to see going into the future for their next gen and their families. It also then reflects how they choose to invest, how they choose to put their wealth, as well as who they choose to become custodians of their wealth.
Yeah, that's very true. Rashid, would you advise us to have the investments, the wealth management structures, the wealth management investments, onshore or offshore? And why would you recommend either of them or neither of them?
All right, thank you, Mercy. I think it depends on the context, really. So for example, a family who, for example, does not want to migrate, has no USD expense, there is no really need to have an offshore entity, really. You can always create your LLC within the local confines of your country and run it that way. But when speaking about offshore, I just want to note that the term offshore has like a negative connotation, which is not really the case. Like there's nothing illegal about having your assets offshore. But it's just important to make sure that the jurisdiction is reputable, is regulated. So you have to make sure it's not one of the blacklisted countries as well. They comply with all the necessary tax reporting and compliance requirements, and include, so for example, your FATCA, so that's the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and then common reporting standard as well. So the local regulations of the jurisdiction where the assets are located must also pay taxes, even though there are some cases where, I think we might speak to this later, preferred jurisdictions where you don't necessarily have to pay tax depending on the structure you use. So why would somebody want an offshore structure? So for one, confidentiality. So speaking from a Nigerian context, I do not think information in banks are confidential because the regulation is not strict enough to punish the release of information. Even when you have NDAs in place, people are still able to check what you have in your bank accounts without your knowledge or permission. So offshore jurisdictions typically have strong laws that protect your privacy and confidentiality, especially with regards to financial transactions. This is something HNIs are really keen on. The tax advantages, like I mentioned earlier, some offer lower tax rates. In Nigeria, for example, depending on the income you make, you could pay as high as 32% tax. Whereas if you think about it from a perspective of paying no tax or paying tax on the income generated alone, it makes sense as opposed to paying tax on your company revenue. Then your asset is protected as well. So you separate yourself from the assets. If you transfer the ownership offshore, like I mentioned earlier. They have laws and regulations that just provide like an added layer of protection for these assets. Like now, some jurisdictions have laws that make it very difficult for creditors to come and seize your assets. So you're not fully liable for anything. So you're only pretty much liable for what you own, not what your LLCs own, basically, because you can put that in a trust. Then political stability. So we all know Nigeria is having an election next month. Anything can happen, really. Nigeria has a history for historically having very violent elections, right? You don't want a situation whereby because you're left in Nigeria, your assets diminish. I know there are times in the past civil wars where people completely lost their houses in Lagos, especially, the whole Igbos going back, they lost their homes. So people want to protect against these things. So there are jurisdictions that for the longest time have had very calm political climates. And then the last one is the banking system. I think offshore jurisdictions have well-developed banking systems. In Nigeria now, for example, if I want to send money to you, Mercy, and I'm using Rashid Bank, you're using Mercy Bank, I cannot send money to you directly. I have to ask you to open an account in Rashid Bank to be able to process that transaction seamlessly. If not, there are so many things and so many levels, which creates, it doesn't create a friendly ecosystem. I mean, because then you begin to see people manipulate the system, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. So Nigeria has this whole dollarization thing, where if it's not an oil and gas company, insurance, an airline, aviation company, it's almost impossible to move dollars across, even to an asset management firm. So, banking systems offshore, they have wider range of financial services. You're able to get low-cost leverages. The products are more, they're able to offer more, as opposed to keeping it here. And also because of the exchange rate regime in Nigeria, Nigeria has, I think, 5 or 6 different parallel rates that are, all running concurrently. It could be very confusing, especially to a foreign investor or even locals here that are trying to diversify their portfolio, maybe like $60-40 Naira. So it's like, how do you go about doing that when the banking system doesn't even allow you to efficiently do that? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's I mean, so that really provides, you have to really think deeply about it, and also look at what are the options, what are the concerns you're trying to work against, and whether you want to have your assets. But the beautiful thing is for the wealthy individuals, more often than not, while they're generating the revenue generating or the wealth generating assets are located onshore, you do have them moving most of those wealth offshore just to protect against it, given all the instability that we've had so far. I mean, you've just mentioned that we've had the foreign currency instability. We also have a bit of political issues as well. Mark, let's talk about VC investments. Can we future-proof VC investments? So as families, as funds, trying to look for where there is alpha, can we future-proof VC investments?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think in many ways, VC is the definition of future-proofing a portfolio, simply because VC tends to have the long feedback loops that we see, and you are largely investing in technology that is still pre-market adoption. But you can also future-proof the actual VC investments that you make. If you look just at the next 5 years as a rough snapshot, the next chapter or half decade in VC is likely going to be characterized by a couple of things. It's going to be characterized by an increased focus on technology, especially asset-light technology and digital assets, as well as an increase driven largely by European investors in sustainable and impact investing. Now, as technology continues to advance, right, and as we start to move into these sectors, there's a whole range of things that an investment entity, family office, a high net worth individual, a fund can do to try and future-proof the range of investments that they plan to make. So number one, it's really staying on top of trends like the one I just mentioned, being aware of that shift sentimentally and physically in terms of deployment of assets into areas or themes like sustainable investing, investing under ESG principles, and impact investment. Being aware of new technological growth. We already touched on, for example, the growth of artificial intelligence and autoregressive models like GPT-3, and how that's going to affect entire industries like marketing and consultancy, but also seeking out a certain degree of diversification even within the venture capital asset class. VC is a small asset class and accounts for just a single-digit percentage of total private wealth all around the world. Despite that, you can seek a lot of diversification within the venture capital and private equity space itself. You can diversify across geographies, you can diversify across instruments used for that venture capital investment, and you can diversify in terms of how hands-on or how exposed you are to different stages or sectors of the economy. For example, for family offices and asset managers, what I'd really advise is going forward to try to diversify which areas or which parts of the world they are more hands-on into, investing with an actual involvement, seeking to be a proactive limited partner, a proactive investor, because that can give them an alpha, not just in terms of the financial returns of securing better investments, but also becoming more knowledgeable investors in their own right. That means upskilling themselves through experiential learning. That means investing in development of the skill set in-house to the actual family office or the asset manager. And that means over time, becoming someone who is more friendly or more open to taking those calculated risks, such as investments in VC and PE, when perhaps more institutional or slow-moving players are less able or willing to do that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Troy. Sisi, I'm going to ask you now. I know Rashid mentioned it when he spoke earlier, just talking about the trends and the dynamics that will shape the lives of affluent and HNIs. He did mention the fact that we don't really have, in Africa, we don't really have a rich history of generational and intergenerational wealth. So how do you think that, I mean, we are having the great wealth transfer that is going to impact different families that have, I mean, African families as well, African family businesses that have been able to stay the course. But how do you think that going into the future, we can also, as Africans, have very rich history? I think someone mentioned the Rockefeller, you have the Rothschild, you have the Bernard Arnault of this world, and every other families that we use as the North Pole of trying to understand how intergenerational wealth can play and how you can facilitate that. So how do you think that as Africans, managing our families wealth, managing our family businesses, how do you think that we can ensure that we do have stories to tell 6, 7, 10 generations after we are gone?
I think intentionality is very important for African family businesses and African families of wealth. When we're intentional, we plan ahead. We look at the options available to us. We start nurturing our next gens, and we start really investing into the future while we are standing in the present. So we can use the history that we know of ourselves individually, of our family, of our wealth, to be able to make decisions today and look into the future and safeguard our next gen and make them responsible stewards. Because what we see in successful family businesses that have been multi-generational is that intentionality, that consciousness of the fact that we would like to see this wealth transfer from one generation to the next. And with each generation, there is a generation that is intentionally adding on to the family wealth and creating more wealth so that the next gen have something to draw upon. I think we've all heard the adage from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which has become something that we've seen in the West, but currently in Africa, we're not really seeing that translate. We see most families fail to have that generational transfer from the building generation, the generation that builds the wealth, to the next generation. So our families continue to become multi-generational, but our wealth does not continue to become multi-generational. So becoming intentional, looking at family governance and structuring our family governance, understanding that the world is dynamic, our families are dynamic, and looking at the 5 capitals of wealth, as well as making sure that as we plan, we look into the future and give the tools necessary to the next gen. The next gen is not the enemy, and the current gen is not the enemy either. Collaboration is very important between the generations, and everybody understanding their role within the family, within the business, and within the wealth structures. When we do things intentionally, we are very calculated, we understand the environment that we're in, and we take into cognition everything that may be push and pull factors. And as families, if we start operating in that way and working together as a collaboration, it might not always be easy because conflict arises, especially when there is multiple generations, when there is conflict in relationships. And it's okay to say we sometimes agree to disagree, but we are stewards and we are working towards making wealth multi-generational, because at the end of the day, when we look at our wealth, we must look at it as a deposit into a bank account. we don't just have anybody having access to that wealth, neither do we just allow anybody to go and decimate the wealth. So as a family, we should collectively work together as a team to be able to continue to build the wealth.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sissy. But just to build on that, you want to talk, let's talk about legacy. So is there a distinction between legacy and stewardship? So as advisors,
I think Mercy is frozen. Is she
Yeah.
just frozen for me or for everyone?
For everyone.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's fine, fantastic. So yeah, technology had to tell us that it's also a major player on the table. So what I was trying to say is, let's talk about legacy versus stewardship. Why is it important for us to think about legacy and think about stewardship when we are trying to talk about intergenerational wealth?
I think legacy is what the current generation is trying to build. They're trying to build something that goes into the future, that recognizes the work and that they've put in the family in building the wealth, as well as building maybe the brands or building the culture within the family. It's something that current gens want to go into the future. Whereas when we're looking at stewardship, we're looking at the custodians of those legacies. They add on to the legacy that has been built, and they can create their own legacies, but then they're safeguarding what has been built. They're making sure that they are keeping it safe, and they're nurturing it, and they're adding value to it. So they're not just there to keep it like a dragon would a pile of gold, but they're there to make sure that they add value. They're there to make sure that they preserve the heritage, they preserve the hard work that is made generation upon generation. So you would say legacy is what current gens or previous gens have built, and then stewardship is what the next gens are building or are learning to do, so that they can be able to add on to the multi-generational conversation. So look at it as a tapestry, as somebody who's weaving a rug. Generation upon generation is putting their own little slither of thread in there and making their own mark. And the next generation is not coming in and starting from the scratch. They're carrying on to what is already being built, and they're adding on value.
Yeah, that's very, very insightful. I'm not sure we do have stories about the individual and their philanthropic endeavors, especially within the African space. We do have a few, but in the context of you have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you have Judge Bezos' ex-wife. We are looking at the quantum of monies that go into philanthropy within the African space. How do you think that considerations around philanthropy, helping the society, I mean, like giving back to the society, how do you think that considerations around climate change and ESG are impacting or are coming into the purview of wealthy families, wealthy family businesses, or affluent individuals?
I would say philanthropy on the African continent is quite big, contrary to what people would want to believe. It's just the different types of philanthropy. The type of philanthropy you're looking at is coming from the ultra high net worth, and that is done in a way where they have vast resources available to them, and they're willing to look at the issues that are pressing and contribute to that. On the continent, you have a lot of ultra high net worths that give to a lot of philanthropic causes, and there's a lot of organizations that speak to this philanthropy and support the work that is being done on the continent. They might not have such a big PR machine when it comes to speaking about what they do, but the work is definitely being done. It's being done at home. It's being done by business families from across the board, from the ones that are just starting up right to the ones that are at the top of the spectrum. And when you look at philanthropy from an African perspective, I think we need to really look at what we call Ubuntu. I am because we are. We are a collective when it comes to African philanthropy. We give in our way and every day, from the person who has very little to give to the people who have much to give. And so when we look at philanthropy from the context, it should not be looked at from the context of how many millions have been given and how it's being documented. Obviously, we have to start documenting it so that we can see the impact of it. But there is so many ways that we have seen Africans change the conversation. We have seen Africans invest in each other, invest in businesses. When it comes to ESG, I think that a lot of African businesses are probably flag bearers when it comes to the conversation around creating sustainable businesses, because a lot of these people have to start their businesses from nothing. They have to start by being supported by the communities around them. They create jobs within these communities, and they create products and goods that then eventually grow into and invest into the economies that are on the continent. We are growing. We are still very young because our history was interrupted as a continent, but we continue to grow. We continue to innovate. And a lot of the solutions that are being spoken on a global level can be started immediately on the African level, because we're starting from where we are now. We are learning from the history of what other people have done in the past, and mistakes that have been made through industrialism and the like. So the conversation that is philanthropy is very much alive on the continent. Families are giving, is just as not as documented as many of other aspects of African wealth. And that's the work that AFF is doing, which is part of the research, trying to understand where the wealth pockets are and what the people are doing, what the industries these families are in, and how they're contributing. It's still a lot of work to be done, but it is being done.
Yes, I do agree. I do agree that we do not seem to have very robust PR machine, so to speak, that kind of talks about, that kind of projects what we do. But as African, we do have very good, wonderful footprints within our societies, within our communities, and all that. So we just have to up the ante to say that while we do have multi-generational families, we would be able to have multi-generational wealth that goes along with the families, and it doesn't just become a mismatch. So we are rounding up this session now. We are rounding up this panel. So I'm going to ask everyone, pending, I don't know if you have a question, so I'm searching. Okay, so we have a question from Aminat. Is there a meeting synergy point between probate in banks and the way? Okay, so so we'll just leave that. We would answer that question. That's not a direct question now for the, okay, so I'm going to ask everyone now, so to kind of just let us have your final take on wealth management, your final take on what individuals, wealthy individuals, wealthy families, family businesses, family offices, what they should take cognizance of as they go into the year. I'll start with Rashid.
All right. So in summary, from an asset structure and protection perspective, I just want everyone to know that it's extremely important to note that laws and regulations in offshore jurisdictions are very subject to change, and it's important to consult with qualified legal and tax advisor or your investment advisors as well for the best jurisdiction for your family office, the specific needs they have, whether you're trying to set up a trust structure, whether you're trying to set up an LLC, a family exempt company. So additionally, like your compliance with tax and regulatory requirements as well must be strictly adhered to. But you do not want a scenario whereby you have domiciled all your assets offshore, goes well the first year, and because you missed out or due to ignorance, because ignorance is not something that is overlooked, your assets will get frozen and you could potentially lose pretty much what you have saved for your family to last the generation. So I would.
Yeah, Troy,
Mhm.
quickly.
Yes, yes. So I guess at the start I said the number one theme of 2023 is volatility. And I think what wealthy families should be cognizant of is they need to start planning. They need to start putting things in place because there's a lot of unpredictability in this volatility. And that would be my advice to those families. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Sisi, do we have anything for the African wealthy and affluent families, individuals, as they head into the year?
Absolutely. I think for this year, it would be important for African families and family businesses or family offices to become more intentional, especially when it comes to family governance itself. We have so many people taking care of the business structures and the wealth structures, but when it comes to family governance, which is the cornerstone or the pillar of successful multi-generational wealth transfer, it's very important to look around and find the right supports and services to be able to start creating that succession plan, to start creating those stewards that are knowledgeable and that will be able to manage the wealth and add value to the wealth that's already been made. And it's also it's very important for us as family businesses on the continent to realize that the future of the success of the continent, even the narrative around Africa becoming a giant, is really set on our shoulders. And if we become intentional and knowledgeable and focus on family governance as well as wealth building, we might be able to have a lot more generational wealth growing across business families on the continent.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Matt, concluding comments.
I think we've heard from the other speakers as well, and I definitely echo the sentiment that this year is going to be a dynamic one. It's going to be one that will affect the next 10 years to come, and it's really important that families, family offices, family businesses, and high net worth individuals in their own right invest in preparing for what's to come and invest in upskilling themselves. I think it's not enough to just sit on the sidelines and assume that the space is going to always be there to protect you. It's important to invest in educating yourself and your opportunities, in speaking to specialists who can guide you in the right direction, but in also building your own understanding of the space, whether this comes to families in Europe, in Asia, Southeast Asia, US, Latin America, or specifically Africa. There's specialists and professionals such as all of us here on the school who can help you to move your assets in a more tangible way, to invest in and understand sectors better, and to take tangible steps to protect your wealth and grow your wealth exponentially, both recession-proofing it, but also building it successfully for the next generation to take over.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's just been really amazing having us speak on the subject and just sharing our knowledge and being able to have this conversation. So we do thank you. We thank you for your time, for making our time to join us for these conversations. And just to round up, for everyone that is listening and participating, for this year 2023, we are, as the panelists have said, we have to be intentional. So intentional about our plans for our families, for our wealth, whether it's mobility issues, whether it's governance issue, whether it's preparing and putting up the right framework as regards dealing with mortality and how it's going to affect the family and how it will affect the business. And also seeking the right advisors to also help you in going on that journey. I mean, this is hardly an area that you want to go on with a do-it-yourself mindset. It's getting the right advisors on the table. And for everyone that has spoken on the panel, for Rashid, for Mark, for Troy, for Sisi, we can connect with them. We have their firms, they are on LinkedIn. and their contacts are always available, so we can reach out to them at any point in time to get further clarifications, to deepen the conversation, and also be able to get the value that they provide as advisors. What is more critical, what is very important, is that we should know that wealth is all about well-being, the well-being of ourselves, the well-being of our community, the well-being of our families, and those that we relate with, and those that our families and ourselves relate with within the society at large. And we should focus on the most critical capitals of wealth. It's not necessarily the financial capital, because that is the engine room that propels every other thing. So when we are talking about intergenerational wealth and generational wealth, transcending generation, have to look at it holistically within the 5 capital: the spiritual capital, the social capital, intellectual capital, and the human capital. Then we now use the financial capital to propel and drive it. So thank you so much, everyone that has listened. And yeah, we do hope that you will join us for the second session. So we are just going to have about 2-3 minutes of water, coffee break. We're going to have some of our panelists drop off because they are operating in different time zones than we are. And it's been fantastic having them and all that. So we'll come up after like 2 minutes to have the second panel. The second panel will be made up of Lee Poskandia. We would have Aisha Abdulkadir Zubai, and we would also have Mr. Shofola Osho, where we will just round up on the conversations that are that affect the lives and families of high net worth individuals. So see you in about 2-3 minutes from now. Thank you so much, everyone.
Sorry,
and thank you
Mercy.
so much. Yes.
Can I just use like a minute or two to answer this question?
Okay.
Yeah, because so Aminat asked, is there a meeting synergy points between probate and banks and the way your organization manages the fund of the deceased that are entrusted in your portfolio? So the first thing to note is that all we can do is advise clients on the best structure to take, but ultimately the final decision lies with the clients. Now, when you register with a bank or an asset management firm, on your account opening documentation, there's always next of kin, which they implying that you sign. Now, the next of kin doesn't necessarily mean assets are passed to that person. It's just your closest blood relative. So they are called to let them know that these are the assets that are currently held with the firm. Do you have access to the will, or do you know if there's a will in place? So they are the ones that would go ahead and, sort of do that process. But what we typically advise our clients to do is you can meet the likes of Mercy, who would help you set up a trust. So there are processes in place for succession. And why this is even good is because it saves you a lot of cost when it comes to tax. You pay as high as 40% of the transferable wealth in some cases. So in order to avoid like uncertainty, I know a lot of people shy away from having that whole will conversation, because especially in Nigeria, I mean, debt is almost like a taboo. So they typically don't want to do that. So if you don't want to write a will, you can always transfer your assets to a trust. And then your trust, you can have rules and regulations, like all the processes, like what should happen if I pass. It would be specifically written there, including your succession. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So so we are back again in about another 2 minutes. So thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, so for our participants, we do look forward to having the next panel, and we'll continue with our conversations. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. So we'll just get straight into the panel 2 conversations. And without much ado, I'm going to ask Lee and Mr. Shofola and Aisha to just let us know what are the trends and dynamics that are shaping the lives of affluent and HNI families that will likely shape their lives this year and and beyond. I know we are all experts in our different fields. Lee is a digital asset expert. Aisha is a Islamic finance, Islamic estate planning expert, while we have the governance guru in the house in the person of Mr. Shofola. So how do you think that as individuals, with respect to preserving our assets, preserving our families, and all, how do you think that, what are the trends and dynamics that are likely to impact what we do, and how should we best go about it? Thank you. I'll start with Mr. Shofola.
Thank you, Mercy. It's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody. To just jump straight into it, I can just say what factors predispose HNIs and affluent families in making investment decisions. And basically it's the need to preserve wealth and pass it on to generations coming. So what trends are going to impact such decisions in 2023? Geopolitical and economic uncertainty, threat of natural disasters, pandemics, things like we just came out of COVID. We're not fully out of it because there's some resurgence in China, but essentially concerns about how you can preserve wealth. We're going to see 2023 has been described as a year where we will expect some global recession. So we're going to, a major trend that will affect how HNIs invest this year will be geopolitical and economic uncertainty. We're going to see a lot of assets, portfolios move out of Europe because of the ongoing Ukraine-Russian war. We're going to see a lull in Nigerian investments in Dubai, the UAE, because of the ongoing diplomatic row between the federal government of Nigeria and the Emirati government. So essentially issues around geopolitical and economic uncertainty, threat of natural disasters and pandemics. We're going to experience a lot of portfolio diversification as a result of this. We're going to see a lot of money, a lot of assets move. For those of us in Nigeria, HNIs in Nigeria were in a year for general elections. So we're going to see people take on a second residence. So it could be along the coast of Africa, or just people take on second or third nationalities. Interestingly, we have a lot of people who are, and a lot of firms that provide such services. I'm sure, Mercy, you also provide that service. And it's quite the trend in Nigeria now. And Nigerians, I think, next to South Africans, have made the most inquiries around taking up second residence and second nationality or third nationalities. The island nations, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, make it very easy. There's a program where you can take up a second nationality in Montenegro. The St. Kitts citizenship by investment. All you are required to do is to have purchase real estate of about $200,000, hold the real estate for upwards of 5 years, limited actual domicile in St. Kitts and Nevis, and you have access to a passport that is visa-free to over 140 countries across the globe. Now, for a lot of HNIs who are Nigerians, that presents a very good way to sweat assets. Another trend I think will take center stage in 2023 and beyond is access. We're going to get a lot more people seeking formalized access to wealth management and customized financial planning. So Mercy, for people like you and your firm, it's open season. I'm sure you are going to get a lot of inquiries. You're going to get people come to you to make inquiries and actually sign you up to do a lot of personal planning for them. Another trend is, there's going to be a growth in family governance and succession planning, formalized family governance now. We're going to see people taking bold steps to actually formalize wealth and try to keep wealth in the family over generations. Digitalization and automation, artificial intelligence. We're going to see a lot of affluents using AI to track investments. We're going to see decisions around investments circled around health and wellness. We're going to see HNIs do a lot more investments around living together, living in resort style homes and not the palatial type of living that they are known to have. You will still have investments in palatial style homes as status symbols and all that, but you are going to see increasingly, if you live in Nigeria, we're going to see increase in access and key into estates like Lakaway Lakes you have in Lagos. It's a golf resort where you have HNIs owning homes and playing golf, and just removed from the general public. We're going to see investments around sustainability and targeted philanthropy. I'm sure across the table we're familiar with the issues around Balenciaga and the advertising campaign. So things like that, concerns around sustainability and investment practices will also take center stage going into 2023 and beyond. But primarily, the major trend will be geopolitical and economic uncertainty and concerns around pandemics and conflicts. I accessed a report by Henley Partners, and in that report, quite sarcastically, it was said that the sea in Africa might mean conflict, because you go all around Africa and it's it's conflict laden. We hope that we're able to solve our problems, but you see a lot of HNIs taking steps to move wealth into safer clients, safer environments, safer portfolios, doing a lot of investments, in safer sectors globally. Essentially, I think for me, those are the trends that will shape how HNIs pass on wealth 2023 and beyond.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, you just more or less like did a recap of the first session that we had and all the talking points that we had in that session, which is just instructive. So let's talk, Lee. Lee, within the digital asset space, within the digital management space, what are the trends? What is 2023 going to unearth for us?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I thought the first panel was absolutely amazing. I'm going to kind of extend what a lot of the discussion has already taken place. Is the world has become much more global, and technology has delivered it to us. But it also makes our succession and our wealth planning a lot more fragile, because we have to start looking to how do we preserve financial value. And a lot of our high net worth individuals want to preserve their legacy. It's not always just about the money. It's about what will their memories be, both with regards to what they leave family members or in philanthropic endeavors, or it may be just through memories to institutions, friends, and financial matter. So when we look at technology and digital assets, we have to recognize that they can be very fragile. As easy it is to get passports for other countries and to now put money in other jurisdictions and international zones, we can now also lose those funds, lose those accounts very quickly. Simply, we can forget about the accounts. We can also have those accounts be rendered inaccessible because we may not be able to use traditional or conventional wisdom to get access, or they may not be always just available when we need them due to laws and policies. When it also comes to financial matter for 2023, we expect to see a growth in crypto, a growth in NFTs, but one area that is really expanding very aggressively is the metaverse. And it's expanding not only in terms of asset values that are going in there, but we're seeing large banking institutions and financial institutions investing heavily in metaverse storefronts so that you could have your own financial advisory firm within the metaverse that's handling millions of dollars and just trading as if it was real life, real New York Stock Exchange. And so you've got this virtual world that is now colliding with the real world, and people are investing heavily in it. And it's crossing over into those blockchain assets. So we see NFT houses that are valued in millions of dollars now only being sold in the metaverse through real estate agents that are now taking a 5% commission. One area that has popped up that is very interesting in this area is in the metaverse, you may not be married to the person who you are in real life. And we have seen one instance where somebody passed away and they had valuable property in a virtual community, and they were married to another player in another jurisdiction. And when that person died, the married player got half the value of the assets in the game, as well as the real life partner only received half the value of the assets because it was split among the virtual wife of this individual. So we have to be much more careful about how we prepare our assets. And so I think we're going to see more of that as younger generations come into the digital phase of their life, and they're doing it at a much younger age, obviously. And when we start thinking about their asset value and succession planning, they're going to have very different concepts than their parents of how to protect or how to use digital property in their life. And so they're going to have a very different approach in financial management and succession management.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee. You really touched on a key issue that I actually wanted us to bring to fore, and that is the fact that increasingly and going into the future, 2023 and beyond, we are going to see a lot of the collision between the physical and the virtual. And just as anyone would say, the youth population, we have an aging population, and the aging population, we have the youth that are more or less like adopters. And not only are they adopters of technology, they are native, they are digital natives. So they are born into it and they know nothing else. So we just see that there's really going to be a lot more of collision between the physical and the virtual. And that just means that, especially when you're speaking about it for wealth planning, estate planning, and whatever, I mean, it's very essential that we know that the digital space and the digital and activities that happen within the digital space has very much crept into our normal lives, and that we need to take full cognizance of that and ensure that we are planning, whether it's estate planning, wealth planning within that space. We will come back to the conversation around the metaverse, because our audience needs to understand how that really does impact them and what it's all about. But before we do that, Aisha, as an expert, Islamic practitioner and expert, what would you say are the trends and dynamics that are affecting the families, affluent HNI families of Muslim extraction?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I would like to thank the previous panelists as well as the present one. They've actually had an extensive conversation on the trends that we're expecting this year. So rather than repeating what they've said, a lot of them have talked about the election that is coming up. It's a major thing for us in Nigeria. We've also talked about the Japaism. A lot of people are leaving the country. And I see majorly, for me, I would say from the Islamic perspective, I would say that Muslims, the affluent Muslims, will now become more cautious. They'll be giving up some of the luxuries that they think they really do not need, but they do it because, yes, they have the money. So a lot of things will be going up this year. The Islam already advises against wastages. Only do what is important and try and leave your heirs to be more richer. It's better for you to leave them richer than poorer. So I think a lot of affluent Muslims, for me, would try and cut their wastages. They will try and cut their unnecessary expenses, because the year is going to be a very challenging one. Election is coming, COVID is still around, the Russian war and all that. So, and also I see a number of young Muslims coming up, young entrepreneurs looking into the digital space, going into IT and information technology and all that. So I feel there are going to be more younger Muslims, and who also understand the Sharia implication of having wealth. So these younger Muslims are asking the right questions. They're getting the right fatwas from the scholars. They understand what wealth is, rather than the way we used to have it in the olden days with our fathers and all that. So this set of Muslims, especially the coming ones who are richer, are understanding what it means to have wealth in Islam, and they are working towards that. So there are lots of fatwas going on, especially with the cryptocurrencies, the digital assets, and I can see a lot of young Muslims coming up in that aspect. So when we plan and we hope that the year is going to be better for us all, like I said earlier, there needs to be cut. We need to cut our wastages. We need to be really intentional about saving the wealth for the next generation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aisha, for that. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Mr. Shofola, I'm going to ask you, in the context of, the earlier panel, we did speak about the peculiarities when it comes to African families. I mean, it is so, we do have intergenerational families, but we don't necessarily have intergenerational wealth that goes into, you're saying, oh, you're looking at this person, you're saying, oh, that's a 7th generation family member, or that's a 12th generation. I mean, when you leave the shores of this country, you go to the European countries, it's so common. Even when you go to the Asian countries, if you go to Japan, and it's so common for them to say, oh, I'm a 12th generation family member, and this is what my family has been doing. We really don't have that as a culture, as a system. And that needs to change, because apart from just saying that we can identify where our roots are, we've had tremendous entrepreneurs in the continent. We've had tremendous entrepreneurs with entrepreneurial spirit, drive against all the odds. They keep at it and all that. Why is it so difficult for us? What are the things that we could use from a governance perspective to ensure that really, while we grow our families across generations, we're actually growing the wealth that is also of the family across generations as well?
Thank you, Mercy. Honestly, I can't put my finger on it and say this is why, African families or Nigerian families have been incapable of passing wealth down 3rd, 4th, or 5th generations. But one thing I have seen from my practice is that I think because there's enormous wealth the scion of the family thinks is invisible and he will probably live forever. You only need to visit the family division of the High Court and you see a number of estate cases, intestacy matters. You'd wonder if, this man ever thought he was, he never planned that he would die one day. It's an unfortunate trend in our clients, but I think there's need for some deliberateness on the part of families and family leaders to ensure that generational wealth is passed, not just to their children, but down the generations. Now, in terms of the structures that affluent families can use, I'll just say that it really has to be formal and formalized, and there has to be some deliberateness and seriousness about it. I can mention a name, and I'm sure if you're not in my age bracket, you probably not know that name, but especially the younger people, Candido Da Rocha. The name is Candido Da Rocha. A lot of people might not know that name, but that was the first Nigerian millionaire on record, and he had immense wealth, held immense assets in Lagos Island, other parts of the Southwest. He started the first native bank in Nigeria, had huge investments in gold and an enormous commercial outfit, and he traded with the Portuguese, the British, and he was just larger than life. The family is still very much around. A lot of them down the generations are technocrats, but we don't see the kind of wealth that Mr. Da Rocha had. In terms of structures that families can use to deliberately keep wealth in the family down the generations, I'll just start by saying, first is to have a family constitution. You might say, oh, what do you need a family constitution? You really have to be deliberate about it. You need a family constitution. You mentioned going to Japan, going to parts of Europe, and you see 5, 6, down 12 generations, and they're still wealthy. Not just the wealth, but they're still in the higher echelons of society. It's deliberate. So I'd say Nigerian and African families, you need to have a family constitution that says who you are, what your values are, what your purpose as a family will be. And I know the constitution will also lay a governance structure for how you manage wealth, how you take decisions in that family. It will determine who the head of the family is. It will determine roles and responsibilities, even sectors. What sector is this line of the family going to be allowed to do business? Is it aviation? Is it trading and commerce? Be very deliberate about it. Who's going to be the spokesperson of the family? Who will speak for this family? What are we going to do? Another thing that the family constitution can cater for is education and training. Mentoring is very, very important if you want to pass wealth down the generations. I'm happy that our colleague spoke about Sharia and the responsibilities around the expectations of Sharia to mentor people. I let them know that the wealth that is sitting in the bank, the wealth that they see around them, they are holding it in trust loosely for generations to come. People have to be taught to not to squander, but to be willing to pass it down down generations. Now, speaking about mentoring and how it can lead to generational wealth, let me just digress a bit to speak about, I won't name him I'm speaking about. We have Nigeria plays home to one of Africa's billionaires, a sugar and rice magnate who has diversified into oil exploration, and he's building the first oil refinery, privately owned oil refinery in Lagos State of Nigeria. Now, he was mentored by his uncle, who was also a billionaire, and his uncle in turn was mentored by his father, who was also a billionaire. So there are lessons to learn, and there's immense capital from teaching people how to manage money. Yes. So you might not have whiz kids across the entire family, but you have one or two pass down the lineage to also grow wealth. So it's really key that African families get deliberate about having a family constitution, saying who they are, the kind of things, values they believe in, and what as a family they are going to do going into the generations. In terms of education and training, which is also something that will be taken care of in the family constitution, you know, for affluent European families, even the Americans, you would find that it's not impossible or it's not uncommon to hear that, oh, we're a member of this family, so we typically go only to Yale. We study only at Yale, or we study only at Oxford. So it's deliberate coaching and mentoring, and it's deliberate to make sure that, you know, they get the education and they remain relevant in society. So first thing I'd advise is that families have a constitution, and they're deliberate about, you know, keeping wealth in the family. Second thing, if you're going to have a family constitution, you know, having a head of family, there should be a succession in the family. Succession is very, very important in wealth management. I'm sure you are aware of the Byung-Chul family, the family that owns about 45% of is it Samsung? I think it's Samsung, and how one of the successors of the original person who started the family fell into a coma for 6 years, and that almost, I mean, sets the family's fortunes ablaze. So family council, I mean, tells you who the head of family is, who are the elders of the family, and, you know, it helps to keep everybody in check. I spoke about a constitution. So it goes beyond just biological lineage. You also need to buy into our philosophy. If you are not going to buy into our philosophy and remain a member of the family, then you can just, you know, the wealth won't come to you because you're not buying into what we want to do. So you need a family deliberate access to professional advice, something that Nigeria and Africa, we have the family office cater for people with a net worth less than 50 million US. But, you know, you can work around things like that. It's a bespoke service. They go beyond financial advisory and investment. They handle things such as you know, managing assets. If you acquire assets in a foreign jurisdiction, they can actually, you know, manage the assets, you know, engage professional advisors to look after the property. It's a kind of bespoke service to ensure that assets stay in the family. So there's need for some formal access to professional advisors, investment advisors, risk management. You need insurance, so key man risk across the family. You need things like that. It really has to be formalized. And then succession planning. You really have to plan for succession. So these are some of the measures I think African and Nigerian families that are serious about, you know, taking generational wealth to the next level. These are things that they really have to be deliberate about going into 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Shofola. Yeah, I don't think we have any more thing to say. I mean, but just to kind of just say that, yeah, that what you've just done is just to reiterate everything about what wealth is and the different capitals that make up the wealth. So for you to have intergenerational wealth, you need to make sure that there's a deliberateness about you coming together as a family and you being able to pass the values, pass on the mentorship, pass on the stories, and now create that entrepreneurial spirit in the family members so that they can always be able to have wealth and be able to make wealth as they go across different generations. Okay, so Lee, I'm going to ask you now. I know that you spoke about some of the trends we are going to see for this 2023. You spoke about crypto and NFTs, but we do know that in 2022, there was a lot of upheaval within that space. Within the crypto space, we saw what happened to the FTX exchange. We also saw what happened. I mean, the revelations are just amazing. I mean, for want of a better word to say, you had all kinds of poor corporate governance surrounding it. Then all those that bought the NFTs, that bought the ape, I mean, overnight you probably saw that your values have turned to like $1 or less. So I mean, when you're acquiring assets, digital assets, what are the things that you should be concerned about? I'm speaking now, not the sentimental value, because we know that digital assets do have a lot of sentimental value. But if you're looking at owning digital asset as part of your asset mix and all that, what would you advise that families of wealth do or individuals of wealth do?
Well, I'm going to come at it from two different perspectives. One is the purchasing of digital assets or ownership of them. And then the other will be the business perspective of them, because there's a whole nother world that most people don't consider. So most people are familiar with purchasing NFTs or owning them. The same with crypto. The same can be with investment portfolios, having online trading accounts. And those we have to protect because we have to protect them from a visibility point of view. If nobody knows that those accounts exist, then time will pass. And depending on what type of account it is, they could be official money transmitters, and then the contents will be treated as abandoned property. Or in many cases, they could be within a game. You could invest $100,000 in artifacts in a game, but that game is not legally recognized as a financial institution, and thereby never turns over that asset as abandoned property down the road. We also have to think about international jurisdictions. If I buy crypto or NFTs and I store them on an exchange based in the United States, but I'm not aware of it because I just buy and I place it, I don't read the terms of service, so I don't know what laws they'll follow. Well, now I have another issue that I need to plan for that I'm just ignorant to, because I just assume that I'm going to buy this virtual sword or this NFT. And the same thing with the metaverse. Metaverse is typically based in California and thereby has to follow California fiduciary laws. And that means following the fiduciary access law. And it's not just about the asset within, but how do you gain accessibility? After you know that the account is visible and you're aware of it, that doesn't mean you automatically get access to it. Unless you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is financial matter in it, most content providers will not release the contents because of privacy policies or privacy laws. So that you have to prepare for that. And in the US, there are fiduciary access laws that call out those requirements. Typically, it includes a username tied to the URL, tied to the account holder, who is tied to the decedent, and then there has to be a directive of who can access the account. So we have a lot of issues around financial matter. Now, if it's a regular financial trading firm like a Fidelity or a fund that might be with TIAA-CREF, then it's going to be a little bit easier. But the key is going to know, is that account visible? Are people aware of it? Because it may not be visible till abandoned properties kick in and it gets posted and is sheeted to the jurisdiction. On the other side of the fence is something that's even becoming much more harmful, particularly to the high net worths who own businesses. And that is because they're aware that when those terms of service agreements are signed for and agreed to, it typically is done by an individual. Even if they're an employee of the company, those agreements are done as individuals. And we've seen here in Canada where that person has passed away and the business owner goes to claim their domain name and their host provider that has all of the contents of their business, their customers, their communications, and GoDaddy and others have said, well, we can't give you that because your business didn't sign the terms of service agreements. It was assigned by the individual, and show me where they then turn around and assigned it to the business. And so what ends up happening is businesses lose their domain name and have been told by issuers, you have to wait till it expires and bid against it in the open market to get it back. But that doesn't guarantee all the contents. And so what we need to do is protect the entire ecosystem. So the email services, both internal and external, the contents, the security, the privacy maintenance programs, payment methods, banking transmission processes, and the domain names have to be secured. You can imagine if you have a domain name that runs a business that's worth, let's say, $20 million, and it expires and somebody picks it up on a service for $10.99. Well, now they can extort that business, and it has happened already, for money just to get back the domain name. And you can just imagine now something simple like not paying attention to subscription expirations and data auto deletion policies can completely bankrupt an organization and an individual. Now, you mentioned FTX. Here in Canada, we had a bigger problem. We had, well, I don't know if it's bigger, but we had an exchange, Quadriga CX, that the owner of the crypto exchange was in India and he died while traveling. So there was no proven fraud. There was some speculation. And when he died, he had the only key to the exchange. So all of the account holders lost their assets. All of the investors lost their investments. And we just saw a total collapse. It didn't just stop there. Then there were class action lawsuits by account holders and investors. And it ended up going back into the family, where the family lost money. And the only thing they were allowed to keep were $90,000 in a Jeep. So it's, if you don't plan, and as many have alluded to, we must be intentional, because if you don't plan, the pitfalls can be more than just loss. It can have ripple effects that go into the family and into investors and into clients as well. So we have to be much more aware of our financial assets and how we do them, whether we do it online or offline, have to make our estates know what our wishes are, make sure they're declared, and make sure we have the appropriate identifying information to create the links so those content providers can know confidently they're not passing on contents or assets to a cyber criminal.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Lee. So, I mean, like we said, we are so used to traditional assets, and really speaking about the digital assets and what we need to take cognizance of is still very much growing. So the knowledge, the awareness is growing. And what you've just spoken about is the fact that we need to make sure that as the knowledge is growing, you actually are embracing that knowledge and you're doing what you need to do, whether it's for your personal digital assets that you've acquired, whether it's for your business and all that. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that you would lose your domain name and all the things that come with it because you didn't, I mean, there's no proper documentation between yourself and the service provider, and the terms of service actually has no protection for you. But you don't have so much of awareness around this, but so we thank you because we know that that's what you're doing as your advocacy. And for us here as well, at Fiduciary Services Limited, we understand this as well. So we have a digital assets inventory that for any client whatsoever that we deal with, we administer that inventory to them, whether you are holding the digital asset for financial value, or whether it's going to be a revenue generating asset for you, or whether it's of sentimental value. We take you through that whole exercise to ensure that at the end of the day, there is adequate plan. So the way you plan for your physical assets is also the way that you are deliberate and you plan for your digital assets. So thank you so much
Mercy,
for shedding more light. Yeah.
I would just add to that. The one concern I have is as you're making a physical inventory, like you said, of your digital assets, you have to be aware of two things. One is, what are the requirements of that custodian? Because they have their guidelines and regulations. But I would also add, the minute you make that list, probably within a day or so, you may be adding to it and not add it to the list, because we're always downloading new apps and we're always adding new websites. And so we have to be aware that we may not have everything in a written format unless we're very diligent at keeping records. So we have to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why for wealthy individuals, for wealthy families, it's very, very advisable. It's extremely advisable that you do have a digital asset expert that is auditing those assets for you, and they are constantly on it. And you have someone resident in house, whether it's your family or whether it's within the family office, or whether it's an external outsourced firm or personnel that does help you to audit it. Because just like we said, digital assets are yet to stay. The world is evolving. I mean, is evolving forward, and we are going to have a whole lot more of the collision between the virtual and the physical and the digital. So it just means that we all have to take cognizance of what we need to do. While we are taking cognizance of our real assets, physical assets, we're also taking cognizance of the digital and the virtual assets. Now I'm going to ask Aisha. Aisha, I know Mr. Shofola alluded to it when he was speaking earlier. How we understand that the Islamic concept of wealth and ownership, they differ from the secular understanding. How does this concept of wealth and ownership, how does it influence asset acquisition and generational wealth planning for Muslims or Islamic clients?
Yeah, thank you very much. For the wealth under Islamic law or in the Sharia, it's more of the way you look at it from the common law. It's a bit different from the Islamic perspective, because when you talk about wealth under Islamic law, it goes beyond just your physical, the physical one or the digital one. It even transcends towards the spiritual wealth and all that. But more importantly, when you consider wealth acquisition for Muslims, there are a number of rules that must be followed. These rules are non-negotiable. So when you're trying to acquire your wealth, you do not go through usury, that's riba, because it is totally prohibited. So whenever you want to acquire wealth and you find out that there's certain elements that would make it ribawi, or that would not make it, that there's a usury to it, that's riba, then you know that that wealth is not going to be halal for you. It's not going to be Sharia compliant for your family. Also, in the game of chance, getting wealth through gambling and all that, those things are totally prohibited, as well as getting certain product like pork, alcohol, or maybe you're selling alcohol, you're dealing in all of these prohibited items. then that would be totally prohibited for a Muslim to go through that. So when you're acquiring your wealth, these are some of the rules that you must abide by. And for it to also be, when you talk about wealth and increasing wealth, in Islam, there's a concept to talk about having al-barakah in it. So before your wealth can actually progress and increase, that means that those principles that you're guiding against are properly in place and you are not in any way conflicted. So if, for example, if you're going to, if you take loan through the bank and there's interest on it and use that wealth, the money, to engage in businesses, we believe as Muslims that that business will not prosper. So these are some of the principles that you need to take in place as Muslims. Now, another important thing I would like to talk about, especially with a wealth acquisition, is that for Muslims, when we talk about you acquiring wealth through any means that you acquire it, it is also important that you put it in the right places. Okay, so when you have your businesses, your family businesses, you need to ensure that it is properly well placed so that you do not get yourself involved in haram activities just in the name of acquiring wealth. And of course, wealth under Islamic law for Muslims, when you talk about ownership of wealth, the husband, the family situation where the wealth of the husband is the same with the wealth of the wife. You have this, they call it, I think, marriage wealth or something. This concept of couples having the same or co-ownership of certain assets. No, for Islam, this is totally free. For a man, you'll have your right to your wealth. For a woman, you also have a right to your wealth. This is important when you talk about legacies, when you're going to be leaving your wealth for your children. Because when you talk about miras and the calculation of the wealth, the wealth that goes to the children, it's calculated differently for the husband as well as the wife. So there's no joint ownership of wealth for Muslims. A woman is not a property of the man, and so she has a right to have properties herself, and she can acquire it as long as you're acquiring it the right way, and you also own it the way it is. So these are some of the things that make it a bit different from the common law aspect. But generally, the wealth we have for it's just like we also have digital assets and all that. So the main thing that you look out for is the principles that guide the acquisition of those. So whether there's riba in it, whether you are engaging in prohibited activities to acquire this wealth, or whether there's gambling, and some of these principles have to be guided against for Muslims. So I believe that the high net worth Muslims will understand this and would even ask the proper questions, will meet the Sharia scholars to guide them on areas, because it's not just good for you to say that you want to get well, you want to be wealthy, you want to be a millionaire. The process of acquiring this is equally important, and it goes down to how your wealth will eventually outlive you. Because for our belief is that if you have a good wealth, your foundation of your wealth is pure, then it will outlive you for generations to come. And that's why we have examples of Dangote, whom their fathers were very wealthy and they are keeping up the legacy. So these are some of the things that needs to be, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Aisha, yeah, I'm still going to come back to you, but it's very instructive to hear you talk about wealth acquisition as a Muslim faithful, and I'm not sure that we do have a lot of appreciation of it, even within the Muslim faithfuls or the Islamic faithfuls within the country. Because, I mean, when you talk about riba, interest, it's everywhere. Although I do know that if you want to go into it in fuller terms, you could have some percentages that seem to be negligible. But that aside, so I mean, so when you're talking about investing or doing businesses around prohibited practices, I mean, investing in haram things that are considered to be haram, whether prostitution, whether gambling, and all that. It's just, I mean, it's just instructive to know that from the outset, if you are Then you also mentioned the al-barika concept, that if it's of good origins, definitely it's going to outlive you. That's so proud. That's absolutely profound to understand that. I mean, if I was to put on my secular hat, I'll probably be asking you that. So where are they going to make this wealth from? As in, what are the other avenues? But I do know that there are other avenues. I mean, you could have buying and selling, you could have leasing. There are other different ways. But if you're someone of the
investment, area compliant investment.
Yeah. I do know that. There's a lot of buying. There's a lot of entrepreneurship that is encouraged within the Islamic economic space and all that. So I'm gonna ask you again, is there a need? I know that we talk about mirats and all that, but let's talk about it. Is there a need for estate planning? And if there's a need for estate planning by Muslims, I mean, because they'll tell you there's already mirats. What am I doing? How do you balance that conversation? Because this is not about like we've identified and we spoke about in the first panel. Africans don't lack intergenerational families. What we lack, what we don't have, what we've not had the discipline, we've not had the governance for, is intergenerational wealth. So when your outright answer is, oh, there is mirat, anything that happens to the assets happens to the assets. How are we going to have a society that is that kind of I would like to take care of his own and ensures that the community and everyone that is within that society are well taken care of, and there are systems in place that ensure that they are not in penury, but actually that they can thrive because those before them have actually laid the foundation. So is there a need for estate planning? And if there is, what are the tools that a Muslim or someone of the Islamic faith can adopt in planning his or her estate?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll start with the fact that, yes, Islam has a system in place. We have mirrors, and there are rules already stated. These are non-negotiable rules because they are stated in the Quran. Because the Quran, whatever the Quran provides is non-negotiable. However, we understand that planning is important for everybody, for Muslims. We believe in planning so much. If you look at the story of Prophet Yusuf in the Quran, where he had a dream, and I'm sure the narration that we have in the Quran is similar to what we have in the Bible, where he had a dream about there's going to be a famine in future and how he's going to plan towards that. So definitely there's planning. Now, let me speak from the legal aspect, and I'm sure my Mr. Osho will also understand that there's will. You can make your will before you die, right? That's for the common law, for the secular jurisdiction. However, even under Islamic law, we also have wasiyah, whereby a Muslim is allowed to make a will. This is a general rule, but it has its own strict exception, or what I would like to say, conditions to it. So before you can make wasiyah as a Muslim, your wasiyah, when I say wasiyah, I mean will. You are trying to give a part of your properties to some of your members of your family. It has to be within the 1/3 of your entire estate, right? So you only have a right to that 1/3. The remaining 2/3 has been taken care of by the Quran, and it has a very beautiful revelation with that. For the child, for all the children, for the wives, for the close relative, there is a percentage, a stated percentage that will go to them, regardless of whether you make a will for them or not. But because we are also talking about estate planning, it's important for every Muslim to ensure that they have a will. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that talks about you making sure that anybody that has a will to write should ensure that he makes a will. He doesn't sleep 2 nights without making a will. So part of the things you need to do as a Muslim is that you list all your properties. This will even give your heirs, it will make it easier for them to identify what properties is to be shared according to the principle of the Sharia. So when you list your properties, and this goes to talk, when we talk about the onshore and offshore properties, you make it easier for them. You list it, you tell them where this is, their documents, you make sure that the documentations are properly made so that it will be easier for them even when they want to go to court to get those properties in place. That's number one. Number two is the fact that when you are making your will, you can also appoint an administrator. I would like to share a personal experience I had. My brother died recently, and he was very young, but it was very easy for us because I'm an expert in Islamic estate distribution, and my dad also is a professor of Islamic law. So there was a way we went about it. So I was imagining if it was somebody who had no idea and they do not even know where to go to when this happened. So interestingly, in Kwara State and in some parts of the northern part of Nigeria, the Sharia court is taking care of this estate distribution for Muslims. Now, rather than the way you go about it under common law, where you have to go through the probate, do all the necessary documentation, this will take years. But the Islamic aspect, what the entire thing we did was to ensure that, okay, we identify who the administrator will be. That has to be somebody that is an expert in Islamic estate distribution, like my dad. And then we went to the Sharia court, gave them the properties, the bank accounts and all that. And immediately they issued a letter to the banks and we got the money, we distributed according to he had no will, by the way, and there's actually no, because he was very young and that's not an excuse anyway, but this is to tell us that we need to start planning for that. Nobody is above that. Even if you are young or you are old, debt will come at the right time. So what I'm trying to get at here is that for some jurisdiction, for some states in Nigeria, it's easier for Muslims to plan their estates. Because when you die and you have a list of your properties, you have appointed an administrator, all you need to do is go to a Sharia court or an area court, depending on jurisdiction, and then get them to appoint you as administrator as directed by the person before he died. And then you get all these properties within months. In fact, it wouldn't take more than 3 months to do this. When we're talking about wills and we are saying that we have a system in place that talks about miras for Muslims, we also identify that yes, you have the right to 1/3 of your estate, your entire estate. You can have your will, you can give it to people you want, especially your close members of family, your children, so that they will continue to live in a very good way even after you die. And so I'll quickly talk about the tools you talked about, the tools of estate planning. So apart from the wasiya, which is the will, we also have gift, hiba. So in your lifetime, you can give some of your properties to those you think are actually in need of it, because you understand your family better than anybody. So you understand, okay, this child will do better if he has this business, if it's running this business, or this child will do better with this estate management and all that. So you can do that with hiba, which is gift. So these are some of the tools that we use. And importantly, also we have these. You can use. We've talked about hiba. We've talked about wasiya. We can also do wakaf. So a Muslim can wakaf his property in his lifetime for the benefit of his families. So we have different types of wakaf, which is to beneficiaries who are not members of a family, and we can also have family wakaf, where you would have stated. So wakaf is just like trust. You understand the trust, the common law trust. So you have that wakaf, and you list your beneficiaries who could be. They could be members of your family, your children, and you said that this wakaf, whatever comes out of it, should be used for their education, for their health. So it can be in different ways. So wakaf is an important tool that we can use also as Muslims. And we have hiba, we have wakaf, and these are some of the tools that are there. So when we say that we are restricted to 1/3, we also have other avenues that we can use, though there is a caveat to that you are doing that. It's not that you're envisaging death and then you want to use that means or those tools to get some people out of the way. So because you know that, okay, the Quran says 2/3 should go to this person, 1/3. So you just want to get all the property while you're alive and get it to the people you are interested in more. So that would not go well, because the Sharia scholars will tell you that no, you do not have rights to your entire property if they are saying that that is the motive behind you. But without that motive and you're just doing it properly to make sure that everybody is okay, then you are okay to do that. So I think that's for the tools. I've mentioned Wasiya, I've mentioned Hiba, Wakaf, and yes, I think that's it. So basically, those are the tools for.
Yeah, very instructive, very, very instructive. So we can tell our Muslim clients that really you will start with your why. Why do you want to, or what's your purpose, or what's your concern? And once is aligned with the fact that you want to ensure that your family is well taken care of, there's intergenerational work planning and all that, then there are tools that you can use to facilitate that without necessarily, so it must not, so the motive must not be that that is deprivation, but actually should be that kind of enhances and provides for the well-being of everyone that is your family member. I think that's very, very instructive and very, very and very well taken. Yeah. So we are rounding up now. We have, if we go by time, we have just about 1 minute or thereabout to round up. So I'm going to quickly ask Lee now. Lee, I know that this space of digital assets is very, very important. That is our future. So could you quickly just tell us what are the basic level, what are the basic measures anyone can take to preserve and protect their digital assets at the basic level? Lee, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. At the very basic level, I would certainly say, make sure you don't think that you can share passwords with someone and think that that will be enough, because there's two real very big problems with that. One, in many countries, it's a violation of law. It's a violation of the content providers' terms of service agreements that you've signed. And many content providers have implemented two-factor authentication, which if you don't get perfect, meaning the security questions, being able to access the phone to get the text code or the email, or having the biometrics there, you're not going to get in. And in fact, it could be interpreted as there was no plan in place, and thereby nobody should receive the contents. So even if you petition after they've locked you out, you have very little chance of getting the contents. Now, beyond just that protection measure and relying on imperfect methods to get access to information, you want to have a list of the URLs and the usernames associated with them, and you want to have any account numbers associated with them, and a clear directive of what you want done with that. Now, that should be tied to any formalized estate plans you have, but don't put them into those estate plans. Have the estate plans refer to that list, and then somebody's going to have to deal with it. And I would put that list in a very safe and secure place, because if someone gets a hold of it, there could be fraud and cyber theft that takes place. Lastly, I would say you need to realize that everything changes and nothing remains the same. So you're going to have to maintain that list to you the best way possible. And especially for a business, make sure you have the person who's running your technology, even if they're an employee, assign all the accounts to the business. That way they will transfer overall very well. And so those are some of the basic things that you can do. But there is a lot more intricacy, and it takes a lot more than just having a one-step solution for everything that you have. There's too much to risk. So you have to be much more diligent about your digital property than you would with your physical property, because you have that intermediary of a content provider holding that data and having contracts with you that remain in force even after you pass.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee. So that just takes us to the next question, is what are the platforms? I know DCS solution, provide solution within the space. But what are the platforms that individuals, families can use, wealthy families can use to be able to help them to walk through this process? And how would you shed more light on what DCS does?
So DCS, which is directivecommunications.com, is one of only a few companies out there. Legacy Concierge is another one that will handle digital property succession management. And why we go digital property versus digital asset is because property is much more holistic. It includes financial value, educational value, governmental accounts, as well as sentimental accounts. So we can help plan those assets or those properties and the online accounts and accounts within, as well as devices. Bear in mind, devices, and I will take another minute here, Mercy, I apologize. Devices are very important. One, we just had an experience here in Toronto where a young man died of COVID very suddenly, and his wife couldn't get access to the Apple iPhone. But in the phone were all the contents of his family and friends. It was all the contact information. Well, she couldn't contact the family and friends to announce the death and the funeral. And so what happened was, finally, 3 months later, some of those family members were reaching out to her to wonder what was going on, because they haven't heard from their cousin or their uncle in a while. And she explained what happened. And she said it was like reliving his death all over again, because family members were so angry at her. They literally were screaming and yelling at her. And so we have to recognize devices are part of that planning as well, just access to information. Now there you can share a password because you have to have the device in hand. So DCS helps to organize and catalog devices and online accounts and digital property in a manner that is compliant to terms of service and international jurisdictions, as well as you are going to be able to provide some directives, both a disclosure of an account contents directive, as well as an action-oriented directive, which is, what do you want to do with the account once information has been passed on? So do you want to close the account? Do you want to delete the account? Do you want to pass it on to family and friends? Do you want to remove your name from the family? I think I said that. And then you can do other things. The one that I would also bear most warning of is the platforms or the features that are offered by many of the content providers directly on their platform. And the reason why is, let's say Google's inactive account manager, I make a decision there that after 9 months, I want Mercy to get all my contents of my Gmail account, which is fine. But if I don't keep it up and something happens to Mercy, Google doesn't know that. And so when I pass away, they're going to still reach out to Mercy and provide all my account information to her. However, when my estate tries to get the information, they won't be able to reach Mercy, and they won't be able to ask Google for information, because Google will say there was a decision made, but they won't disclose it because they look at that decision itself as private and confidential information. So these inactive account managers and legacy content managers can actually be counterproductive to what your plan is. And it can result in lost accounts and permanent lockout from being able to access the assets within.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much for shedding light on that. So as we round up, I don't know if we have questions. If you have questions, I can't see any question in the Q&A box, but if you want to ask your questions, please use the Q&A box. So I'm going to ask our panelists to please just in one minute, just kind of round up for us, our conversations. So with respect to wealth management, what would you tell the affluent? What would you tell the family businesses? What would you tell the HNIs to do with respect to the different areas that that we work around for 2023 and beyond? What would you tell them? What would be your advice to them? I'll start with Mr. Shofola. Yes.
Thank you, Mercy. It's been an interesting session. My advice would be, well, to the HNIs, formalize, use vehicles. If you have to set up a trust, do that. You can have a private trust or public trust. You can engage investment advisors, preferably a family office, because they can provide more bespoke wealth management services, and generally think generational. I like the Sharia concept around wealth. You know, you're holding it, quote unquote, in trust for generations to come. Think generational. You're just one step in the longer chain. So hold the wealth for the generations to come. I think from my side, this is the advice I would give to our HNIs.
Yeah, thank you so much. Aisha?
Yeah, so from my own perspective, Islamic perspective as well, I would say that you're trying to leave your wealth for your children. So it's equally important for you to train them so that they understand the value of what you are leaving. So sometimes we have rich fathers who would leave so much, and then the children would just squander it within a few years. So it's important, as you're also planning your estate with all the tools we've mentioned, try and train your kids. Give them the financial training, make them independent so that they don't even look at your wealth, but they also try to build on it, right? And they keep the legacy going. So it's very important. And of course, Sharia compliance investments are enormous. Mercy. If we want to do this, we will do it. If you want to cut riba, you will cut riba. There are lots of things. There's sukuk, there are Sharia compliant investments. Name them, Murabaha, Mudoroba, so many means of going by this. And the importance is not just about saying that, okay, maybe they are not so, their profits will not be that much, but you remember that if you do it the right way, it will stay with you forever. Why would you want to cut corners and then at the end of the day, you don't get anything? So for the children, it's important we train them, and then we look for all of these Sharia compliant means of gaining wealth, and inshallah we'll be fine. Thank you so much. It was a nice session. I learned so much from this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you so much, Aisha. So Lee, what would be your concluding comments?
I would say that one of the ongoing themes is do things with intention. Don't let things pass by. Don't assume things will take care of themselves, because they will not, especially in the area of digital assets. We no longer have control over our own destiny in terms of distribution when things are being controlled by outside sources. Take the proactive approach. Also, do not assume the do-it-yourself programs that are out there are going to be complete. You need to have an advisor, and advisors have intelligence, they have awareness, they have industry know-how. We need to take advantage of that. So the combination of technology and in-person advisement, I think, is a great recipe for achieving your goals.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. That was the perfect rounding up. Intentionality, we've talked about it. I mean, from the first session up onto this session, is absolutely important that if we are thinking generational wealth, if we are thinking intergenerational wealth, if we are thinking wealth preservation, if we are thinking of living legacies into the future, then there is no shortcut about it. We have to be intentional about it. We have to also formalize the governance settings, the governance structures we put in place to allow this to happen. We have to let that, we have to formalize it as well. Then there is no gainsaying that we must educate the next gen. We must educate them. We must let them, we must mentor them. We must mentor them. We must educate them. And to do all this, you need to have your advisors working with you. You need your advisors. For everyone that has been in the panel here, I mean, we are all advisors in our different expert areas, and we do have the intelligence. We have the day-to-day intelligence. We have the awareness. We have the industry know-how to handhold clients, to handhold you, handhold your family business, and hold your family, and hold when it comes to your assets and what are the concerns you have and what are the issues, challenges that you want to deal with. So please, just to round up on what Lee said, this is not a do-it-yourself manual that you can pick up. You need to talk to the advisors, you need to talk to the experts, and we are absolutely here, ready and willing to help in whatever way. So it's been fantastic having this conversation, and the conversation continues. So we could meet any of the panelists. We could connect with them, connect with their businesses via LinkedIn, via their websites. That whole entire information is going to be available. So, I mean, as part of our post-webinar communication, where we would put up all the links, the websites, and where you can access the panelists and be able to continue the conversation and ensure that in our planning for 2023, amidst all the upheaval, amidst all the socio-political and political economic issues that we have, you will find out that there's still wealth to be made. So please, let's go ahead, let's make that wealth, but let's be intentional about the legacies that we want to keep. Let's be intentional about the footprints we want to keep into the future, starting from 2023 and beyond. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists. It's been a fantastic outing. We thank you for your time. Finally, for Lee and Aisha and Mr. Shofola that have been here with us for more than since 1 p.m. or even earlier than that. West African time. So thank you so much. You are really the one that has made this event possible. So we do look forward that when we call upon you next time, you will actually be available as well to speak with us and speak with our participants, our clients, and everyone alike. So we say thank you so much. And till next time, we wish everyone a fantastic year. We wish everyone an intentional year, and we wish everyone all the best with all the decisions we have to make as the year comes into full spring. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank you, Mercy. It was fantastic being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. If we do have questions, please let us send an email, have a conversation, leave whatever it is. You can be sure that you have someone in the team or on the panelists address it. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.